Hey folks, just a quick update for my Kate and Tom's project, and this is a slightly different format to my usual style, which typically involves a lot of post-production. This video is literally filmed in real time with me narrating, then it's run through my auto editor, so it's a little bit choppy in places, but it should give you the gist of the process I'm going through. So sit back and enjoy. Hey folks, just a quick catch up with the sessions on the Kate and Tom's project, and if you're not familiar with the part 1, 2 and 3, I'll leave links to those videos in the description below. But to cut a long story short, I'm basically converting an old WordPress classic theme into a block theme, and I've got various content for the Kate and Tom site. I got to a point where I needed to pull in all of the widgets. Now, if I look at my database, which I've been through before, you can see that we've got all this widget data, and I was going to formulate something that did a SQL query basically to pull back this data. And I want to put all this into like multi-dimensional array. So it struck me that I could actually use AI to do this. So what I did was I basically filtered out the data I wanted and then exported that to a CSV file. Once I'd exported that, I could then upload that to ChatGPT. So I did that. It wasn't perfect, but basically I asked it to, given the post metadata for widgets, how can I use the key to collate the related or the relevant metadata? Basically, that's what I'm asking. And to iterate over them and increment them by 1 and put them in an associated multi-dimensional array using SQL and PHP. So basically, I made a mistake and I uploaded the wrong data. So I had to correct myself. So I uploaded the right data in the end. So based on what I'd asked it, it kind of gave me back what I wanted, but it wasn't absolutely correct. But it was enough there for me to cherry pick to pull out what I needed. As you can see here, that it's actually collating the data into post IDs, which I actually just want the metadata because I'm already looping through the post IDs anyway. But there was enough there to give me something that I needed. I think I also needed to append the widget type here with hyphenated key rather than underscore. So it went ahead and did that. But basically, it gave me enough there to work with. So in my function that is used for the converting widgets from metadata into new patterns, I've got this new function here that basically gets my pattern metadata from the post ID. And I'll run through this in a minute to sort of show you what happens. But basically what I'm doing is if there is widget data, I'm then getting the existing post content data and then parsing that as blocks or resolving the metadata with a pattern. So that will sort of pertain to a particular pattern that will sit in my theme folder, which is called standard widget text in this instance. So I've done that one. I've actually started working on part 4. Now this has been a fairly long sprint because of the complexity of just setting this initially up. But anyway, so what happens is I get my pattern, and then if we look at the pattern, you'll see that in my pattern, I'm actually referring to a key called title, 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 and subtitle, subtitle, subtitle. I'm actually using that as a key to hook onto the metadata. So then eventually what I do is I then get the existing blocks and then I merge them with the resolved pattern with the new data, and then I create a new content and basically just update the post. And then that appends each widget to my individual house or post content. I then saw a post on Tinternet from Remkus de Vries. And he basically referred to a post by Nick Diego, who mentioned Cursor AI and particularly setting up for WordPress. And I thought, well, I knew about this, but I read the post and I watched the video. And as we do over the weekend, we kind of like, oh, let's have a look at that. So what I was reluctant to do was actually jump from one code editor to another just as I was going to embark on a big project. But actually after seeing it and then jumping into it and testing it, I thought actually this could be useful. So I got so far and I'd actually written my own function for parsing or resolving the metadata with the pattern data. And just out of interest, I thought, well, I've got this far. I'll pop over to Cursor AI. Now, because of what the content I saw from Nick Diego, I decided, I need to give this a go. So if we just have a look, the beauty about Cursor AI is you can add in cursor rules. Now, cursor rules for this particular project, and they can be honed into whatever project you want. I've set this up for, as Nick Diego's pointed out, there is a site you can go to and pick up specific, it kind of like acts like an agent for the AI. So it's basically set up as a WordPress expert and it's pulling in certain PHP versions. It's setting up the coding standards for WordPress and various other stuff. So basically it's saying use the best practices from WordPress when using this project. So out of interest, what I did was I'd asked the AI to basically take a look at my function, which is this function here. If we look at the chat, which is here, yeah. So we've got two areas. We've got chat and composer, and composer is basically where it changes all your data. So yeah, basically I asked it basically to look at my function and see if I could do it in a more efficient way, which is here. So I wondered if there was a more efficient way of running this function, specifically the function I'm on about, to pull legacy metadata in from the post meta table and then update my post content and convert the markup to new block content where the settings and content were provided by the widget meta variable. So basically I just got it to check my function. So it went off and thought about it, and I had to actually plug in the whole function here. And it came back with something fascinating. It basically suggested that I should first let's optimize it and optimize the pattern handling by creating a dedicated pattern handler class. And I thought, yeah, that totally makes sense. So I basically got it just to change my code. And so it added 33 lines of new code and it took out 48. And I was kind of happy with it. I've had to reiterate it because it wasn't perfect. But just that suggestion was revolutionary to me because it made sense, because I can put all of my pattern class or all of my pattern logic into the pattern class. So I got it to change that, and it was it was just awesome. So I'm now using a new refactored version of my function, and even if you just use it for refactoring, I think this approach is just genius, just brilliant. So what I'm doing now is I'm passing in now there is a pattern called a standard widget, and it's particularly a standard text widget. So once I'm iterating over my data with metadata, I can then jump into my class. So if we just remove this for the moment. So we're still in my original function at the moment, but when we reiterate over this, it's going to eventually get the class that's been created, and it's going to instantiate it, and then it's going to get my pattern name, and then it's going to get pattern content, and the pattern content then jumps into the class. So if we look at the pattern class, and eventually I'll come on to that. So if we get the pattern class, if we just stay in this for the moment, no, we don't have to do that. So if we get the pattern, we can see here that we are getting the pattern path from my block theme, which is in my patterns folder. If the file is empty, it's just going to return false. It's then going to get the pattern content, or get the file get contents, and then it's going to remove all the PHP stuff, and then it's going to return that content. So now we've got my pattern content, and then what we do is we then run the pattern content through the metadata, and we basically transform the pattern into the content from the meta, which is the widget content effectively. So again, it goes back into the pattern handler class. We then parse the blocks, which basically turns markup into logic array or arrays of data. And then we can then use a switch case to specifically or conditionally go into the update whatever the specific widget is that I need to update. So in this case, if it's a standard widget text, then we're going to use the function standard widget text to update the content. So then what we're doing here is we're basically just iterating over the block. We're replacing the pattern data with whatever parameters are set in the metadata. So here we're just setting the color backgrounds and any classes that are used in the inner HTML and also in the inner content. Now the HTML is basically the wrapper of a block. So that might be the parameters and the classes that are used in that. And also when the div markup is written, which is, I think, inner content, I'll run through this in a minute with XDebug. We'll just check that. So the class actually exists as attributes, which we're replacing up here. It then exists in inner HTML and inner content. And then we run it through the inner blocks to update further information because it appears, in terms of the content, it appears in multiple places for attributes like colors and stuff like that. And then eventually we get to this replace content if it's a particular block. So this part will actually take my hook data, which is title, 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 and replace it with the metadata. So if we look at the standard widget text, we can see here that we've got title, 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 and then we've got subtitle, subtitle, subtitle. So that's all that's doing is it's using the pattern class to update the contents of that data. So those are the replacements, and then it's checking the inner HTML and it's mapping that data. And it's going to do it in the block content, inner content as well. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So what we'll do is I'll just run through this with my XDebug on. So make sure I've got some breakpoints in place. So I'm now in Cursor. So I need to be in XDebug. So I've got some block breakpoints set up here. Not block breakpoints, just breakpoints. So I'm going to stop at certain points when we transform this pattern data, just to show you exactly what's going on. Okay, so I've already got them set up. You can see that I've been running this already. Now, so if we run through this, it's going to stop at particular points. Now, technically, there is an expensive query in this particular function, but we're only going to run this during the update. So when we migrate the content from the metadata, so it's not going to be part of the kind of day-to-day running of the site. So I'm not too concerned about the expensive query that's happening right now before we get to the breakpoint. There we go. So right here, we've got the content. I think that's the content from my pattern. Yeah, so this is my pattern content. If we just step back, so we transform the pattern. Yeah, so here, if I step back through the stack, basically we're getting the pattern from the pattern in my block theme, and then we're running that pattern through this function here, and then we're replacing the data that comes in from the metadata. So if we have a look at the metadata, we can see that we've got, it's easier if I look over here, we've got various things. So we've got a title, subtitle, we don't have any body text, I'll come on to that in a second, and we have a color scheme, which is color 7. Now, there was an issue here. If you run a string through the block, I think it's the parser, if you parse the blocks, it actually converts any alphanumerical into hyphenated string. So color 7 with no space would become color -7, and that was causing me a problem. So I actually had to come up with a different function to rename all of my color scheme from alphanumeric to alpha. So it's now color 7, SEVERN 7. And but that was, it was just a minor issue. So we're replacing the color background, and then we eventually get to replace the content, which is in here. So if we jump over some of this data, we will eventually end up with a block. So we end up with a resolved pattern, and this is the new pattern with the new data. So if we look at here, when you parse blocks in WordPress from data that's, well, if you get a pattern, for some reason it adds an empty block at the top and an empty block below. I guess this is to space blocks out in the editor. But if we have a look at the inner block, now this, if we look at the attributes and the metadata, we can see that this is now coming from my pattern. And rather than pattern content, which is going to be in inner blocks, rather than it be the content that was in my original pattern, this is now the content coming from my metadata, which is exactly what I want. So like I said, if we're resolving the block there, so if we jump over that, we now have merged our two blocks, or our content blocks, as well as our new standard text widget pattern with the new data in it. And then we're just going to create, so when you go from parse blocks, which is basically an array of blocks, you can then convert them back to serialized blocks, and it will take all the attributes and settings that you have in a block and inner blocks and content blocks and convert it into markup. So if we just jump over that, now see that we've got markup there, and that comes from our parsed blocks. And then I'm just updating the pattern there. So before I update that, I just want to go back to the site. If we see here, so this is the post in question. This is the house that's going to update with a new widget. I'm just going to refresh that, make sure I saved it, because I did remove the widget beforehand. Yeah, removed. So if I go back to my code editor, cursor, and now we're going to update that content with the new pattern. So if we jump over that, it's now going on to the next widget, which is a different widget altogether. So we now pop back to the post. Technically, this should have updated with a new widget, and there we have it. So if I place that pattern below, you'll see exactly what it looks like in its raw format, which is that one there. As you can see, that's the original pattern that comes from my theme. It then goes through my function, or the new class that was created for me by Cursor AI, and it replaces it with all the metadata. So that was quite a large sprint, and there's a lot going on there, and I've given you a lot to sort of break down, but hopefully that kind of makes sense, and I can get on to the next stage, and that's actually building all of these individual widgets and doing some more processing. So I'm going to leave it there for now, and I'm going to carry on creating these patterns and then setting up new switch cases for the individual patterns and the metadata. So I'll see you in the next session. Hey folks, so in my last sprint, I actually explained that I'd swapped my code editor from VS Code to Cursor, and I've been playing with it quite a bit recently. So in the previous sprint, what I did was asked it to look at my procedural code for converting my metadata into patterns that come from my theme folder, which is here. And it then came back with a class, and I've been through all that, but it blew my mind basically. Since watching Nick Diego's video on WordPress.com, which I'll leave a link to in the description below, it's just blown my mind. And I've been working quite a lot with it last sort of couple of days, and it keeps blowing my mind. So what I've been doing, just to give you the backdrop, is literally going. This is a result of where I'm at the moment. So I've got some text widgets, gallery widgets, and this is all coming from the metadata, from the legacy data, and it's converting it into a new pattern, and it's dumping it into the content as a block. So what I've been doing systematically is actually building these out as patterns directly in the block editor, and then copying the code from the code editor, and then dumping it in, finding where it is, and then copying it out, and then dumping it into my theme as a pattern. So since I've been playing with Cursor, and I've just, like I said, been blown away, because you can throw documents at it, you can throw directories, you can really get it to think about stuff. So rather than actually build these in the block editor and then convert them to patterns, what I decided to do was to come to what will be my next pattern, and let's take a screenshot of just that pattern, and then let's see what AI can do with that, or Cursor AI. So we can come back to Cursor now. I've actually run through this as a test, but I'm just going to go through it again. So I'm just going to drag my image onto the chat. And what did I say? I said, using the attached, can you build WordPress markup as a pattern that matches the existing patterns in my theme here? So what I'm going to do is just drag that folder, dump it in there, and I'm going to hit return. I'm going to see what happens. The cursor's going to think about it for a bit, and boom, it starts to write a pattern. So I'm going to change the names of these because I need to match the metadata. But for me to build that out would actually take me, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. But just by throwing an image of what I want it to look like, Cursor's just spitting it out as code for me. Markup, block markup, effectively. So then it's just going to run through and tell me what it's done. Save metadata structure, category, consistent spacing, similar heading styles, matching, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. So that's pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is, just to test that this works, I'm not going to copy the pattern itself, or the pattern header. Oops. I'm not going to copy the pattern. I'm just going to copy the markup. So then I'm going to go back to my blocks, and then right at the end here in the code editor, I'm just going to paste that code. Let's see what happens. So right at the end of there, paste that in, exit code editor, and it's built something, and it's not perfect, but it's a good foundation for me to start building off. So I need to give the background a color, and like I said, this just blows my mind. It's like every time I try something new, it kind of does stuff, and I'm like, this is incredible. And I know that we're all kind of worried about AI taking our jobs and stuff like that, but actually the way LLMs work is that the LLM is, the large language model is a brain, and then it has an agent that does a specific job, and it communicates with you, the user, and it remembers the conversation and the context in the agent, and then the LLM allows it to recognize patterns and then get better at doing stuff for you. So without the user and without the agent, the LLM isn't much. You have to throw stuff at it. So I'm not sure whether there's probably an agent involved with the Cursor AI with this project, and it's remembering stuff because it just holds the chat. But to get me where I am, and as I go through this project, I think it's going to be pretty good. I mean, what it's done there in under a minute would take me 10 minutes. It's going to save me a hell of a lot of time doing this job. So it isn't perfect. No, I get that. But let's just replace some of these images and see what happens. I'm just going to bring in some images that are already in the library as placeholders, and that will give me a visual representation of how well it did. We get another image from there, media library, and we'll put that one in. So if we just close this up, I don't need to see that. So this is the pattern, the rough pattern or the markup that Cursor AI gave me, and that is the widget I need to recreate. So there is some nuances and differences that I need to address, but the main structure's there, kind of thing, isn't it? It's actually staggering. So, right, I'm just going to fix this up. So this is what I'm periodically going to do for all of these widgets. So I don't think that column width is right. I think that's more like 50%. And so is that one. And I'm also, I didn't seem to place that image for some reason. Select, there we go. For some reason, that's not quite right. Okay, just needed to refresh it somehow by clicking on them. So my text needs to be aligned to the center in the column, and I probably need some block spacing applied. That's to the column. In the actual columns, the parent columns, I guess, what I'm trying to say. So I need to space that out a bit more. Maybe that's too much. Okay, and then I need to just get my images and then block gap those as well. So that's placed them in columns. That's column 1. So I need to space out those, block gap on that one there. So I'm going to go, what am I going to go? 2. I'm going to go small and just ensure that the columns there also has 2, which it does. Okay, so that's kind of like built my pattern. Now what I'll do is in comparison to what I'm trying to build. So this is the widget that exists on the existing site. I'm trying to look at the top of that bar there and make a match. That isn't far off to me, and that's just going to save me oodles of time. So all I need to do now is to just pull that pattern out. This will be called title, I think. And then I just need a body. And then what I do is I use that as the hook in my pattern, and I will replace the images as well. So in the code, what I'm going to do is look at what's going on in the actual code itself, and then I'm just going to put placeholders in. But essentially, that's my pattern. Yeah, so I'm going to replace the source, which I did on a previous in some previous logic. So if we just close that out, what did I look at? Four images. So that replaces the attributes. Come back out of that. And this replaces all the images. So I'm replacing title. There is a subtitle with that particular widget, and that gets replaced, and then also the body. And then it comes to my gallery of images. So in my metadata, what comes in is the image ID. So all I'm doing is getting the attachment ID from my local source, and then I'm replacing the URL from production, so I don't have to upload oodles of images to my local database, which is not going to be very time efficient. So then in the markup, what I have here is we're going to use that, and we're going to replace the source with the string replace for the URL and the alt tag from the image attachment. So yeah, I just need to sort that logic out, and then I can run the script again, and that is the gallery. Let me just quick look at so this is a standard text widget with gallery images to the right, and again there's another standard text widget here with gallery images to the left. So essentially it will be the same pattern, but in reverse. So this one here is a wide image widget, which again is used. So I've already built that. So the repeating patterns, once I've got most of the widgets done, there's another gallery images to the right. It's going to be resolved. There's just an wide image there. And I think this is a standard widget again, but with a set of images underneath it. So yeah, Cursor AI, man, it's just incredible. So I'm going to carry on with this, and I'll come back in the next sprint. Hey folks, so in my last sprint, I thought it was quite a substantial one, but I've made quite a bit of progress. I was wrong. This one was even longer, but there was a few unknowns that we hit that kind of held the job up a little bit. If I look at I think my last video was shot on the 12th of February, and you can see all these logs that I've been through. It's now the 12th of March, so there has been a significant time difference. And also what I previously showed with Cursor AI has changed quite a bit since they've released a different version, so things have changed. But I've basically fairly confident now that I've built all the patterns for all of the houses. As you can see here, this is the original site, or the existing site. All the functionality now is converted all of the existing widgets into patterns. If we look at my code again, so we're jumping backwards and forwards, but we can see that here that I've got all these patterns that are the widget conversions effectively. So what was a widget is now a pattern, and it has this hook data, which I've shown in a previous video, so I won't go into that. But basically, I needed to have some sort of functionality that allowed me to track what widget I'd built, because some of these widgets are common amongst all of the houses, but some of them are quite not commonly used. So I needed a mechanism to track that, which I'll come on to shortly. But I also needed to create a mechanism where I could remove or clean up patterns, which allowed me to remove all of the patterns. Now this does a couple of things. This will allow me to, if I need to reiterate over a pattern because it didn't quite work, or I noticed something in a couple of houses that didn't work, I could remove them and then clean them up and just run through, address the issue that I needed to address, and then rerun the script again. And this will also mean that if the client spots something that I haven't spotted, I can just go through that same process. So having this cleanup pattern in process, which basically takes all of the houses up to a point where it keeps the gallery of images and then also the title banner, but it just removes all of the widgets. And then I can run through that process again. So in order for me to track what widgets are built over 300 houses, like I said, I've used some error logging effectively. That's on the remove or the cleanup function, but in my build widgets to patterns function, there's lots of logging occurring. When we go into resolve patterns, there we've got what widgets were used, and then and that basically helps me identify what I've built and what I haven't built. You'll also notice that, and I'll come on how I identified that shortly. Now, the other thing I came across was there is a special widget in houses. If I scroll all the way to the bottom, when we get to this point here, there's something called a separator widget. Now, this isn't something I could get AI to do. I had to kind of devise this myself. But when we get to the separator widget, which is, if I show you in the back end, which is here, this effectively creates a new page, but it isn't a new page. It's still part of this page. But that is a problematic issue for the client because they don't have a page to SEO. If I show you what happens, so when we hit the separator widget, we actually jump into this page here, which is called things to do. So it's not relative to the house. It's about things you can do around, things you can do in the area where the house is. So although we go to a different URL, the page effectively looks the same apart from the title stays the same, but we get a different set of header images. And that's effectively what that separator does. And then all of the widgets are then built. So I had to build a kind of separate function for that, which is kind of like, where is it? I'm basically just setting a global variable that's initially set to false, but then when we get to the separator widget, that then becomes true, and then that is assigned the post ID or a new post ID of the child, which has already been created before this step, and then we use that ID, which has already been hooked to the parent as the child, and then we kind of update, and then so basically subpages of houses get created. So to identify what I'd actually built and hadn't built, I used where I'd used the logging. I actually just threw this at ChatGPT, which was something like, that's the widget. That's the log file there. Basically, I took the log file, all the widgets that were built, and then filtered it out, threw it at ChatGPT, which is something like 1,400 lines of code or logs. I could then filter that down to a unique list and then remove all the widgets that I knew that I had built that actually exist in my patterns, and then I could address the ones that I hadn't built. So that was a really good different way of using AI, but this is how you can use it in your workflow. So I want to demonstrate also the process I actually went through of building these patterns. And you can see here that I've actually run this function already, but I'm using something called, which you're probably all familiar with, which is WP-CLI. And what this will allow me to do is to use the command eval, and that will allow me to evaluate logic in my code. And I can use the eval command to basically fire the action. So this is my own action that fires this hook. And I'm also actually passing parameters, which is, this again will allow me to pass an array of IDs. So if I only wanted to update a certain house or houses, I can just identify them by their house ID. So I can either pass this parameter or not. On this occasion, I'm actually going to pass the parameter because I only want to update one house, just to show you what's going on. So I've got XDebug running, and I don't know why I just closed it then, but I did. And I've got some breakpoints. Let me just check where this breakpoint is. That's the transform pattern. Yeah, okay, so we get to that point. Right, if I go back. So in order to run this with WP-CLI, I can just run WP eval do action and then my function. Now I do want to pass an array here. Now by passing an array, obviously I can send one house or I can send multiple houses. I only want to, on this occasion, send one house, which is going to be Meadowbank, which is this one here. So I'm going to get that ID there, copy, and then paste that in there, and this will just run on that house. So I want to go into the detail of actually how I used AI to help me create functions for this. Now you'll notice what happens basically is that I've been through this, I think, with previous videos, but basically we get the blocks from the content that already exists on the house page itself. And then we take our metadata and we take the key of that of the widget as well as the post ID, and we resolve the pattern from the metadata. So when we resolve, we basically, this is where I'm logging stuff. When I'm using a switch case to basically identify which pattern to draw from and then replace the data for. So I'm going to go into standard widget, which is, where are you? Standard widget. And there's a widget here, which is a common one called gallery right. And this goes through my pattern class handler, which was created by AI. So we go to transform pattern, and then we can basically identify what the pattern is and then extract the data from the pattern and from the meta ID and metadata, and then replace that information in the pattern and then dump it into the page. So I think it's this one here that I want. Actually, it's just quicker for me to jump there. Okay. So I want to get to this point here and show you how I got AI to help me out. So if I run that in WP CLI, that should stop at my breakpoints. And I've got a funny feeling it's not going to, but it should do. So the call stack's running. Let's check my, I've run the cleanup function. That's why I didn't want to do that. No. Right, cancel that because that's already been done. The function I wanted to run was, this one at the top here, was run widgets to patterns. So my bad. And I probably do have this somewhere. Run widgets to patterns, there we go. So that is now going to run this pattern, this function, action hook, and not the one that I didn't need to run. So if I run that, it should stop at my breakpoints. There we go. So now we are at the point where we go into a generic function which is called transform pattern, and this goes into the class. So if we jump into that, so now we're at this point. That's my pattern content, and then I've got my meta data which I need to pull into that pattern. And I think I've got another, yeah, it's this point I want to get to. So when we jump over this stuff, it's going to conditionally use a switch case to jump into the actual function that I want to use for this particular pattern, which should be widget 4 images or widget, I think it's standard widget image left or image right. Image right, always the one that no, I think it was, oh no, it is this one, right. Anyway, so if we just jump over all this. So now we got to this point. Now this is the interesting part of using AI. Basically what I did was to take the data that I've got. So at this point, I've got all these variables that I can use. Now, what I did was to jump into the debug console, and what I can do is to var dump these variables. So if I var dump the block, now nothing happens in the debug console, but if you look in the terminal, we now have that data, that's basically the pattern that's been converted into an array using the parse block function, which is built in to core. So effectively what I did was I said, I copied that out and then I added that to chat. So I'm going to create a new chat here. So it's using my pattern handler class. But if you imagine, scroll all the way down to the bottom, I go add to chat, and it adds those lines of code. So using the first lines of code, I can then go back to the debug console and then var dump the meta data, which is like that. And then again, go back to the terminal. Now this is the metadata up to that point there. So again, I can add that to chat. And effectively what I did was to go through each one of these and just asked it to take the original pattern and replace certain key points with the data from the meta. So I'm effectively going, just get some real estate here. Let's close those down. This is my pattern block, which has got all of my inner blocks and inner blocks. And if you're any familiar with inner blocks, you know, they're all nested effectively. So this point, I'm totally familiar with these patterns now. I can read them like the back of my hand. So this inner block here is where the heading and the subheading and the paragraph text is. And then in my other block along here, I've got columns, which are then made up of my other inner blocks, which should be eventually images. Yeah, there we go. So I basically asked the AI to say, you know, take this array and then replace all of the details with the meta array. And that's how I basically built all of this functionality, and it updated the code. Now it was a fairly long sprint. There was lots of iteration, but it does what I need it to do. So what I can effectively do is let that run to the point at which it finishes. So I can turn all these breakpoints off and let it run off. That should be doing its thing, and eventually this will come to an end. There you go. So now if we go to the house and refresh the page, we can see all of our lovely widgets. So this is working quite well, and there will be a child page for this. Oh, that's a weird widget that I had to. So this is a review widget. So I had to build a new block for this. And again, that was kind of like merged into the way all of my logic to build this. But this allows the client to basically remove reviews or add reviews. So in the front end, it's slightly different, but this is the only kind of way I could make it work. It's probably a better way to do that, but that's the solution I've gone with for now. So then we get to our separator, and then we should be able to view our page. If I go view page, we now have all the widgets in place, yada, yada, yada. Up here, if we go to things to do, which is technically a new page, we now have the gallery images from the separator and then all of the other widgets. So that's where I'm at, and all of the widgets are built for all of the houses. Ooh, there's one I've got to debug. That's not right. That should be bringing in the title. So just by going through this process, I've spotted a bug, which is fine. That's cool. So yeah, there was some trial and error, and that's added to how long it's taken me to get to this point, but hopefully that gives you the gist of actually what I've done and how I've got to the point I'm at. Yeah, so I've now reached a stage where I think I'm happy. Obviously, I've got to debug that one issue that we just spotted there. But I'm at a point where I can start thinking about going on to the next steps that I haven't actually determined yet, but I'm in a good place to sort of put this up on a staging environment so that the client can start looking at it, because up until this point, there's been a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and there's not been a lot of tangible stuff for them to look at. So now I'm in a position to do that. I can then take it to the next steps. Now, I may have to go and reiterate over these as the client checks these widgets. That's why I've got the cleanup patterns in place. But yeah, it's been a lengthy process, and this is probably a lengthy video session to go through, but hopefully there's some value there that you've got. And after giving the presentation to the stage I'm at with the client, they're very happy with the progress so far, which makes me happy. And I'm still excited about this project, and it's been really interesting to do it. So yeah, it's all good. My next approach, or my next phase, is going to be, I'm not sure when I'm going to get onto that, but I'm going to think about that in the next coming days. And it's probably going to be around the search and the filtering. So I've got things in mind how I'm going to approach it, but I need to do some testing and things like that. So now that concludes this update, and thanks all for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode. Cheers, guys.